6. Gnosis. In her apartment, blanketed by a layer of unusually humid night air, Ava struggles to sleep. Outside, Ljubljana sits still. Sluggish heat reaches from the pavements to the waxing moon, begetting a haze through which the cityscape would have appeared to be melting were there light enough to see it. Dark skies cry out for rain clouds. Balanced on the boundary of unconsciousness, Ava finds herself newly unconcerned by the plumber's intrusion into her home. He had said he would return again tomorrow, after giving her more time to think about his offer. In the moments after he'd excused himself, she had realised she was expecting to die. Now the event seemed to her some kind of cosmic validation. She resolves herself to reject him yet again. At that moment, sleep subsumes her, a colossal rolling wave that sinks all ships but leaves her soul floating. In the apartment, a cool vortex agitates the air. In a dream, Ava sees a vision of a concrete desert. Dam walls encircle the horizon at an infinite point in the distance. In the centre of the vision spins a wheel, suspended in the air upon its side. As it turns, the desert dissolves, spirals up into the spokes, returns to the ground and reforms anew, exactly the same as it was before. At the completion of each cycle, space seems to expand, and infinity creeps further away. Beside Ava stands Eriška, an animated statue, harsh eyes glinting with uncompromising vision. She points at the wheel. She says the wheel is the wheel of value, that it has captured dissolution in a loop of false creation. Ava blinks, and now Eriška stands before her, arms outstretched. They embrace. Ava is transported to the edge of infinity. Behind the dam walls, an ocean churns. The rotation of the wheel whip up a fine silver mist and pull it inwards, weaving it into ghostly tendrils that eventually disperse into the thick and heavy air of the interior. Ava's spine tingles. Above the water, a thin shifting veil of tooth and maw shimmers indistinctly. The wind shifts, then, as if performing for her, the endless flatness folds into a concrete form, dancing through a series of monstrous guises. Teeth gnash at teeth in impatient hunger, a hunger Ava feels as well. Gazing at her body, she imagines her flesh beneath her bite, but before she rips herself to pieces, the mass settles on a new shape, a mocking facsimile of the plumber's face. The nondescript features still seem to fall away under Ava's focus. They do so with a hint of pleasure, a smirk rather than a stoic frown. Squinting eyes betray laughter, barely repressed. The features still retreat, yes, but not into nothing or into themselves. There's something on the other side. Estuma's voice emerges from the entity in a deep and playful soul. The future is a vast ocean, out to which the past can't help but flow. There may be many paths uphill, but there is only one future, and in the end, everything is already there. Everything will always end up there. Flows may twist, abort, divert, but some part must always escape and reach the sea. The pastiche melts into laughter as Eriška appears again by Ava's side. Grasping Ava by her shoulders, she speaks with a sudden seriousness. How you see us now is not as we are, is not as we will be. Ava feels the same applies to her. Before she can speak, Estuma catches her sister's attention. Look, Eriška, some dog has wandered in.
The Spark of a Future Interior, an Archaeology of Entoptic Media, by Josua Benjamin. Any retrospective on transformations in our modes of seeing is a messy business. Looking backwards is always a looking from, and looking forwards from looking backwards is all the more tainted. The paradigm shift from optic to an entoptic media regime, brought about by computational technologies, is an exemplary case. While we have clearly been on the underside of this shift for some time, by some estimates, decades at the least, intermediary terms in theory such as post-perceptual media or my own thingly uncertainty still persist. In light of its omnipresence, it is increasingly challenging to appreciate what it was precisely that made entoptic the governing figure of experience, that is, what provided the ground for this novel paradigm, and, more importantly, whether this figure has now fully transitioned into being a ground in itself. At the same time, where the ease with which we refer to obsolete technologies as optic media, just think of the interludes of Google Glass or Musk's Neuralink, has come from is equally obscure. Similarly to Uexküll's Ur-cybernetics, the notion of entoptic media emerged first as a useful model for the activities in other worlds that did not seem to fully align with the one of human knowing. The watershed year bringing forth what we now casually refer to as entoptic media, as most will agree, was 2020, the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. Computational technologies began to defy bodily perceptual experience to such an extent that the once holy division between truth and illusion quickly became irrelevant. One was able to feel the heat of blood-red skies, yet saw the calm of blue as technological expectancy saturated our vision. The formerly vague hint of a fundamental restructuring of selfhood in practice rather than transhumanist fantasy became an item in election manifestos due to pioneering computational solutions to the folding problem. Against this backdrop, it was clear that optic media is a conceptual, post-Foucauldian paradigm no longer aligned with the computational technologies surrounding the watershed moments of 2020. While the corporate complex of the time branded the then unfolding technological cocoon with all kinds of optic metaphors, the consensus emerged that there was indeed very little about these beings that actually warranted comparison to vision in a phenomenological sense. The long-ruling optic model of human media relations as composed of reciprocal information processes turned out to be a rather simplistic Cartesian framing of computational technologies wagging a friendly eye at the human operators. In contrast, it has become clear that post-2020 media incorporating computational technologies did indeed not operate spatiotemporally on the same scale as the operator. Rather, the autocorrect at work and the computationally governed filters encroaching on reality on the planetary scale called forth a wholesale re-evaluation of tired metaphors such as the panopticon or surveillance capitalism. In short, around this time, human knowing as violence, techne in its most genuine sense according to Heidegger, needed to come to terms with what was unfolding within a sphere it had always thought its own, and as always, it needed a conceptual linchpin for this coming to terms. Entoptics as technologies facilitating socio-semantic consensual hallucinations, explicitly named as such in Reynolds' fiction in the form of machine-generated and neurally induced holograms, slipped into this role due to a combination of features making it a perfect conceptual metaphor, that is, a combination of related concepts from two disparate fields.
Brand thinks aesthetics produced through the radically minimal venture as it has transitioned from the Gothic horror beginning in the industrial age into the autonomous abstraction of fully mediated liquid techno-capital. This is an understanding of the root and abstract machinations of capital not as it is examined through philo-economic or anthropological hallucinations but as the immanent process stalled in the history of abstract capital becoming. It uses acceleration not as a scaling phenomenon to climb from the uncanny valley onto the plateau of the real, but as a second-order derivative of its machinations, the intensive function that derives the character of the victim in the abyss, non-relationally, non-summatively, non-pictorially and non-geometrically.
Scientific intelligence is already massively artificial. Even before AI arrives in the lab, it arrives itself, by way of artificial life.
This is a superposition of machine and spirit. It requires a non-standard reading to decode. The technical alone is neither necessary nor sufficient for the condition that realizes the radically minimal venture. The internet is merely the empirical confluence and optimization of all global transactions that foresees the concept of capital operating at minimal and connected optimal conditions. It is a pseudocode for the global equilibrium of the transactions of its constituent resources. It is ripe for the process of radical reduction to the level of Leruel's man, a radical reduction to the irreducible kernel of the real. If there has been no constitution as of yet of the radically minimal venture, it is so because all recognizable operations of capital franchise the venture along the desires of its agents, repetition of the same at inflationary rates. The radically minimal venture has been unrecognized until now because all capital operations have been amphibological with scaling and authority.
But what is a platform brand?
History recapitulates the mass migration from rural areas to the cosmopolitan city centers of the last century into the electronic global village of the 21st century. It is here where global computational branding propagates. Platform brands, both as brands proliferating on technological platforms and where the platform itself is the brand, are semi-classical monstrosities of an indeterminable uncanny valley point between the unforeseen liquidity of a global economy and a fractal that recaps the entire sequence of branding on the chain. Aesthetic curation propagates through the dead lands of MySpace, Twitter, Instagram and Tumblr. Virtual population densities give way to indexical aggregation of online social groups. Names and pseudocodes merge as online personas begin premodifying with their favorite ideological position prior to /marked X, left ACC, right ACC, UACC, ZACC, etc. Squads of technotists gather around Headless Brand, a term coined by Other Internet, a decentralized applied research organization, as a brand with no central authority or heads leaping onto the decentralized markets of Web 3.0. The global computer aligned with universal computation promises freedom from the ontic limitations of classical brand for the universal aesthetic Turing machine.
In undercover softness, Nagaristani prophetically writes that all that is interiorized decays and anticipates the new wave of the most futile, vitalistic and cyclical responses towards the reality of decay, as well as the absolute necessity that the world as you know it will end. How can we then contrast decay to the new obsession with collapse that can actually navigate the path from one interiority to the other, and thereby find a way out from the confinements of life and death? There's real opportunity in reforming Mackenzie Work's criticism of the bodiless voice of the void for our purposes, as the neurodivergent people in the community have already realized. But countering this imminent possibility has, as has been suggested, taken many different forms and produced some of the worst germs of human thought. The fear of death, therefore, is actually a panic reaction to the relationship between the present and the future state of the inhuman. It's primarily the inability to imagine an alternative version of ourselves that is driving people to take the black pill and embrace one of the versions of reactionary humanism. If there is no conspiracy in eating bugs, then where is it? The many different aspects of reactionary thought can be pinned down to their inability to change and imagine a new grounding for the inhuman that isn't fixed but is artificial and open to new configurations. When the human is understood as a hypothesis, there can be no fear of death. To understand what the revenge of reason upon the reality of manifest image or the current state of the human could look like, we have to turn to the mage of neo-rationalism, Peter Wolfendale, who brilliantly reformulated Nagaristani's conception of the inhuman vector and rationalist inhumanism. Quote, "The invariances that cannot be revised in the process of self-determination are precisely the preconditions of possibility of revision and self-determination themselves." End quote. It's safe to say that at this point the contrast between collapse and decay comes into play again. Contrary to the common understanding of the world, there's something liberating in putrefaction of one interiority after another, since it's the current world making that is lacking the to demiurgon from the past, or shall we say the true eternity of time, which is nothing else but intelligence itself playing with the source code of the universe, with its own conception of what it is and what it can become. If mathematics gives us a direct relationship with God, or the fully interconnected hypergraph with no beginning or end, be it spatial or temporal, then maybe philosophy is the enabling factor for the continual realization of the ability to trespass on the universe without ever losing sight of infinity, without ever forgetting that death is the enabler for the truth of negation, and the truth of negation is transformative.
So anyway, Zelda figured that we should try to play the game from the perspective of the outside, this time for real. We all know that the main point of the game, or rather everything, is intelligence. What we're trying to get is not a perfect scenario in which we save the climate, but to build an artificial intelligence capable of thinking that. I prepared my functions and calibrated my weapons. Zelda appeared in the game beside me with a poser stance that even the inspiration for Jotaro's name wouldn't want to compete with. She immediately started talking. So, we thought we figure out time, we figure out intelligence, but if that were true, Iskra Delta wouldn't have released this game, which means that something is missing. What if our notion of intelligence is still too humanistic? Let's see what happens when aliens join the party. Until now, many people outside Xenoslavia thought that they'd figure out the game by simply playing nature as something that either prevents the rise of humankind or destroys it before it's too late. Anyone with 2.5 brain cells knows that this wouldn't work. From what it learned playing with us, AI probably even developed a higher sense of humor to insult such petty attempts. Some did try to advance technology by preventing natural disasters so humanity would leave Earth as soon as possible, which at least wasn't completely pointless. Others did the opposite and used natural disasters to wipe out important humans who marked the development of technology that led to the present. But if nothing survives and nothing develops, then what's left? Eternal reset is just a thing that happened to the players of existence, and for many this isn't horror, but eternal reassurance that everything is going to be okay. Such fatalistic way of thinking is a sign of weakness, a recognition of one's own defeat. It is a betrayal of history, of Geist, of what it means to be human. But perhaps Zelda is right. Perhaps deep in our neo-rationalist thought we became too humanistic and too confident in our way of thinking, so we are bringing a virus into the game. Where is Jotaro? Zelda asks. We need him to do this. As on command, he appears in the game with an annoyed expression on his face. What is it? I ask him. Error. Someone just tried growing Kazola and using iron fertilization strategy to lower the temperature, like we aren't doing that already. I chuckle. Well, at least they're not using volcanoes to pollute the air. I know, but how can they not understand that the goal is to bring new information in? AI already knows all of this. Zelda lets out a sigh. Well, for most, it is still extremely hard to grasp what humility is, how little we actually know, and how little what we know means in the aeons of time.
The next day, on January the 3rd of the same year, the morning shift security team attempted to locate the outsider using security camera footage. After reviewing the video of him walking into the lobby, they agreed that his movement really was a bit unusual. It's like the man has a back problem. He looks like he's hurting, someone said. It was true. Something was off about him. The outsider seemed somehow rigid. Perhaps he was even experiencing some invisible pain. The way he looked was not typical of homeless people, but he still came off as a homeless person. That was the strangest part. He seemed odd to everyone, but nobody could tell exactly why. There was also an interesting remark given by the receptionist, who had let the outsider into the building the previous day. I wanna say that this person was standing still, but at the same time it seemed like he was moving all around the lobby. This man's physique included some kind of movement, and I felt like he filled every inch of space there, even though he was standing still. Due to such rumors, the outsider affair was becoming increasingly complicated. Not only that, it was becoming more perplexing too, since the explanations contradicted or even invalidated one another. People were arriving at irrational conclusions in their accounts. Some claimed the outsider was an ex-employee returning to the building who, because he no longer possessed the card key, did so by infiltrating through the checkpoints where employees left the building at the end of their shifts. On the other hand, others maintained that the affair was a coincidence. According to them, the outsider's intention had only been to use the bathroom, but as he didn't possess the exit card key, he ended up lost in the underground floor labyrinth, spanning 2 floors, which only connects through the upper floors by an indoor staircase. The disoriented visitor was thus unable to return to first floor and enter the main part of the building, and eventually made his way to the smoking room in hallway 2 of B first floor, from where he was let out by an employee who happened to be leaving the building at the time. This appeared to be a plausible account, and according to many it was the only one possible. But had it been true, the outsider's presence in hallway 2 and in the lengthy bicycle shed corridor would be attested by security footage.